Thank you very much for the warm welcome. And when we come up with this title, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? So well done for saying it coherently, particularly after lunch. And thank you for choosing us to come and have a listen straight after lunch as well. So we've got 20 minutes to canter through some high-level stats we want to share with you about our most recent research report around workplace connection. And we really want to make sure we spend enough time talking to you about the so what. What can we actually do with that information and leave you with some practical ideas around connection. I suppose before we get into it, by way of introduction, my name is Chris Britton and I am the People Experience Director at Reward Gateway. Very fancy title. My role really encaptures the employee lifecycle. So anyone who's thinking about joining us all the way through to the point they decide to leave us, and all the good stuff in the middle sits within the People Experience umbrella. And I'm joined on stage by...
Hi everyone, I'm Christina Kelly. I'm Reward Manager at Reward Gateway. So essentially I look after all the internal employees and deal with everything around comp, ben, and everything that falls in between, which I'm sure is really familiar to pretty much all of you in the room today.
Yeah, and we've got 20 minutes. We've got a fair bit to get through. We will hopefully have time for questions at the end. But of course, if we do not, you're welcome to come and see us on our stand. We're actually giving out free copies of the Workplace Connection Report itself. So you can come out and grab a copy of that at the very least if you want to see any of the more detailed data that we're about to share with you. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Workplace Connection Report. This was published in September. It's our latest round of research, and I'll share a little bit more about what that includes in a second. We're then going to touch on what does that actually mean for a multi-generational workforce now and in the future, because there's more generations just chomping at the bit to come and join us in the workplace. So we're going to talk about what that might mean. And then, as I mentioned, at the very end, we're going to leave you with some suggestions and top tips about some of the stuff we do at RG, but also some of the stuff we work with our clients on about how you can put this stuff into real terms in real life. So the Workplace Connection Report itself, as I mentioned, published back in September. The audience of who we surveyed, if you like, for this report was 2,000 people in total. 1,000 of them were just general employees of businesses in the UK, and the other 1,000 are HR professionals like all of us in the room today. So it's quite a nice sample of people who are living and breathing what we're trying to sell from an HR community and the HR community themselves also. I'm going to share with you our initial stat, and before I do that, let's do a quick show of hands with something which I find quite interesting. So put your hand up if anyone's got access to a laptop. Okay, so keep your hand up if you've got access to a mobile phone with the internet, got social media accounts, access to a radio.
Some people are thinking about that one.
Radio. What's that radio? iPad. Yeah, the point I'm trying to make here is in this extremely connected world where everything is interconnected, particularly using technology, social media platforms, people, and all the other stuff that goes around it, what our research tells us is our employees are feeling more disconnected than ever. So these stats, when I first read them, for me were quite shocking. So what the Workplace Connection Report showed is 2/3 of our employees now say they do not feel a sense of connection or belonging in the workplace. 66% of people in the UK, remember this is a sample of HR professionals and general employees, say they do not feel a sense of connection to what they're doing in their workplace. Actually, perhaps more alarmingly, 25%, 1 in 4 of people say they're experiencing loneliness frequently or very frequently in the workplace. Does that sound scary, right? Crikey, that's a lot of people who are feeling a certain type of way. And we're going to go into some of the reasons why we think that might be shortly. But just touching on a few other stats, and again, all of these stats plus a whole lot more available in the connection report, which you're welcome to grab afterwards. I'm not going to go through all of this because I appreciate it's a lot of data on the screen, but managers, over 1/3 of managers with big teams, so by big teams we're kind of categorizing that as 11 or more direct reports, feel lonely. So I'm a manager with lots of people around me, lots of direct reports, but I feel lonely. Doesn't quite compute and quite make sense until we start digging into the reasons behind that. Another really interesting thing that stuck out for me, the difference between people who categorize themselves as introverts or extroverts. Is it surprising or not surprising? I don't know, but our introverts in the world are feeling more lonely than our extroverts. There are lots and lots and lots of reasons why this might be. Why don't you share some of the examples of what we think this might be?
Yeah, and I think the biggest way to summarise this is I think we can all definitely say we've been through a period of perma-crisis and we're still in it. Whether that's been through COVID, the pandemic, the last couple of years, phrases such as the Great Resignation, the Great Readjustment will be very, very familiar to all of us. Climate change and social action is all becoming more paramount. And the biggest piece is we can't escape it. As Chris said at the start, we have access to it 24/7 at our fingertips. So there's no way for us to have a break or escape. So we have this permanent blur and blend from our personal life into our work life. It's also around communication. How are we communicating? Are we getting enough time to actually have that one-to-one time? Or is work taking up so much that kind of decompress isn't able to take place? Anything else that you can think of around that your thoughts are?
Life.
Life in general.
Is tough. You don't have to look too far, either on the radios that we all listen to or the internet or whatever we got. But the world is just a really tough place for human beings. And that's the thing where at RG, what we try to really look at the moment, it's a real philosophy we're going with is, let's look at the whole human being and what things are impacting them in work, out of work, because to the point you're making, Christina, absolutely spot on. We're so connected, it is impossible to separate work and our personal lives in today's world. The whole work-life balance thing, that went out with the 2010s, right?
It's work-life blend.
Work-life blend, work-life blur, work-life merge, smashed together, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of stuff impacting how our employees are feeling at this particular moment in time. The good news is there's some simple stuff that our employees are telling us that can help them feel more connected and create that sense of belonging. And the even better news is, from the report that we've put together, it doesn't cost that much money or time or effort. But it does take a little bit of authenticity and purpose. So you can see very comfortably at the top of what people are saying will help them feel like they've got more value to their business and they're connected to their brand and their colleagues and everyone else. It's just some recognition for the work that they do. Now, obviously, for some people, that can mean simple thank yous, public displays of affection, it could be awards, promotions, whatever it is, but recognition is something that's coming out very, very clearly on top for what people are saying will help them feel more connected. And the other stuff on there, I look at this and I think this is common sense. So time with my managers, opportunities to celebrate life events and things that are going on around me, face-to-face contact with people, and that can be virtual or in person, meaningful work. This is common sense. So why on earth are businesses not doing it more often? And I guess when I think about that question, why are we not doing this common sense stuff more often is, well, it's maybe not a case of the business isn't doing it, it's perhaps our employees are not aware that we're doing it, and that comes back to what you were just saying about communication, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to touch on multi-generational workforces and what this means. I was in a talk in this room earlier on today which touched on multi-generation, and I think there's been lots of conversations, right, about multi-generational. What's your take on this multi-generational thing? What does it actually mean to you?
I think this makes me always chuckle because I can think back to about 10 years ago when in an internal presentation I was covering the fact that Gen Z were entering the workforce, and obviously, yeah, I know, and now it's Gen Alpha. For many of us, especially anyone in retail and hospitality, that's really not that far away, especially when you consider people are going to enter the workforce. Age 16, that's really coming up quite close. And we think about what that means in terms of that workplace disconnection. We've got a great opportunity. It can go one of two ways. It's either going to really create that dynamic, inclusive environment, or it's got a huge opportunity and risk around conflict. And we've seen this happening more often. Again, I spoke about the external environment and what's been going on. The number of over 65s in the workforce has risen by almost 1 million. And that's been mainly in the last couple of years, but it's not just people kind of returning to the workforce post-retirement. It's also people actively choosing, whether that's for financial or social connection reasons, to remain in the workplace. So we've got those two ends really kind of stretching on both sides of that workforce piece. We also know as well that there's different things that these generations want. And one thing we're quite conscious of not doing today is giving you any boxes of what each of those groups want. We don't want to kind of stereotype what these generations are. And Chris has got a great analogy that he shared with me earlier. Yeah. I just say it's called Ozzy and Charles, and I'll let you lead on.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on employee personas. I don't know if anyone uses employee personas or has used the concept of personas before, right? Typically, personas and things like this are made up of the demographic data. Age, where they live, ethnicity, all that sort of stuff. And actually, the example you've just described is, if we were to use purely demographic data, so as an example, if we were to talk about King Charles, white, male, wealthy, married, family, is the exact same demographic data as Ozzy Osbourne. Now, I don't know if you would want Ozzy Osbourne running the country from a monarchy perspective, I don't know. But possibly, it might be a little bit more interesting, but that is the risk of using purely demographic data to do this. And it's the same with generational data like this. When we talk about ages, we are sometimes at risk of pigeonholing ourselves into a particular type of person. So when we talk about employee personas, we talk about lifting that up a level and talking about not just the demographic data, it's important of course, but actually talking about motivators, frustrations, career development needs. And we'll touch on some of that in a second. I think a really interesting point just on this alpha generation, right?
Yeah.
I remember when we started talking about millennials coming into the workplace, right? And the stuff in the media was, these pesky millennials, they're disruptive, they're difficult to work with. They don't want to work. And now when we look back, we probably think, well, actually it might be a fair few of us in this room are in that category, myself included. Were they difficult, or are we difficult, or were we just different? Did we just have a different way of thinking at that particular moment in time? And it's the same with alpha generation. I'm seeing stuff about this alpha generation that are coming into the workforce in the next 5 or 10 years. They're going to be difficult. They don't know they're born. They're going to be wanting all these things that we've never been able to have before. Are they difficult and all that sort of stuff? Or again, are they just different? So we just have to get on board with that, right, as a business and adapt.
Yeah, and I think this is where part of what we want to kind of take you through today is how this can really impact how you need to look at your EVP, or as I like to call it, your people experience proposition. You know, how are you going to kind of shape that sell? Is it that you're going to go down the route of having a benefit offering that kind of fits for every single person? Or are you going to try and look at it slightly differently? And that's the kind of spin that we want to give to you today, is to look at that kind of EVP, that kind of give and get in a slightly different lens. But also lean on how you're going to communicate it. Because we did the hands up at the start around who's got access to technology. The representation in this room probably isn't the same as what it will be for your whole workforce. There are people who maybe don't have access to a laptop. There are people who don't have access to an iPad. You know, there is, Wi-Fi and data poverty is a thing. So how can we make sure that we're being really cognizant of that at the same time?
Yeah, and it kind of brings us into the employee life cycle. One of the things in my role within people experience at RG that we try and do more and more of is, you've got the typical employee life cycle, but what we try to do more of is people experience mapping. So I don't know if that's a thing that anyone's come across or anyone's dabbled with, or you're a bit curious about what the mapping process is. Essentially, and I've seen this in again, a couple of different talks today, it's looking at the empathy points, the moments that matter to people, the pain points, the things that people really care about, and starting there, and then building everything else around it. So when it comes to benefits, reward recognition, discounts, relationships and managers, performance reviews, all that sort of stuff, if you map it out to each stage of the employee life cycle, starting with the stuff that people care about the most, the empathy moments, then you're far more likely to have a successful journey. So one of the things I get asked quite often when we do these sorts of things is, Chris, well, that's fine, but where on earth do you start with these sort of things? And I guess my guidance for that would be start at the start. So what are the reasons people are joining your business in the first place? Clearly having an EVP or a people experience proposition which matters to people, you've got to make that true when people actually join your business. And another thing that we're starting to do more and more of in RG is this final stage of the life cycle, which often goes unnoticed or forgotten about, is this saying goodbye, or the alumni, or the exit, or whatever you want to call offboarding. I don't know about you and your businesses, but certainly one of the things we're seeing in our business and a lot of the clients we work with is this boomerang effect. At the very least, people who leave your organization are going to be champions of your brand, if you do it correctly. But more and more increasingly, more likely, particularly we talk about people working for longer, chances are they might come back and be an employee again in the future. So leaving things on the right terms, helping them off board. And we started introducing benefits which roll on once you leave the RG family, so you can still stay part of it, because it encourages that at least championship of the brand. But if not, they come back to you in the future as an employee who still wants to be there and work for you. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at this, is this employee experience mapping. So map out all the pain points, the empathy points that really matter to people the most. It's a good place to start.
And I suppose when we think about this, it's really looking at that line in more of a circular motion and really thinking, okay, what are those kind of key bits that are going to be different? As we said, people are re-entering the workforce. They're leaving an employer and then they're coming back. when we look at kind of some of the later generations in the workforce at the moment, they're expected to be with their employer or in their job for around 3 years. That's a very stark difference to boomers, which was set at 8 on an average. So if you think about adding that into that kind of 65-year life cycle, and then people get living and working even longer than that, there's going to be a lot of interchanging in between that life cycle. And that's why it's really key to take your EVP and really shine that people experience lens on it. What is going to matter? And I've heard moments that matter a lot in some of the different talks I've joined today. And it really is having that lens. Don't bucket people, but look at it in terms of they're all going to be at different points in their journey, irrelevant of age, irrelevant of where they are in their career. If you move jobs, do you start all the way back again at that employee life cycle because you're in a new situation, and really have that situational lens? And this is where it's looking at things like elder care and childcare assistance. Millennials and Gen Zs are really starting to feel that squeeze. They've got dependents at both ends. They've got dependents within children, and they've got dependents within their parents. And it's how do they really kind of balance that? And that's where we are seeing more of that kind of flexibility and work from home requests coming through to enable that need. Career walls and maps. This is something I always love to say is, there is no such thing as a career ladder. It is a climbing wall. People go left, right, up, down. Snakes and ladders is essentially what it is. And let's make sure that our benefits fit for that purpose to enable people to do that. Flexibility and work-life blend, we've mentioned that before. And then ultimately, giving back an ESG, that's not just for one generation. There are so many millions of people who choose to volunteer and give back across the globe. Let's not just assume that sits with one generation. That could be and it could be, again, any point in that life cycle. So really take that switch and go for people experience.
Yeah, and I think just a point on that ESG and the giving back stuff, particularly the younger generations coming through, they are the ones who are absolutely paying attention. Not just to what your business does, the products you sell, that sort of stuff, but the reputation you have. Do you cause any scandal on a regular basis? Are you doing stuff that's the right stuff to do just because it's the right stuff to do? So they're paying attention to that type of thing. So opportunities within benefits offerings for them to be able to give back to their communities, find purpose, value, all that sort of good stuff is something they're looking out for. We do some really great stuff at RG, right?
Yeah, so some of the stuff that we've already started is looking at transgender support, freedom from addiction, and really helping to lift any kind of stigma that may be around some of these areas. Having a wellbeing allowance, again, I mentioned that kind of tech poverty. How can we help people get that through salary sacrifice? But we're not stopping there. Some other things we're looking at the moment is personal safety apps. How can we help people feel safe, whether they're at work or at home, that can enable them to send a notification to somebody when they're travelling? Wearable tech, something we've been looking at, healthcare screening to help with that preventative healthcare crisis. Again, it's been a key topic that's been today, as well as work from anywhere policies. We know it's coming. How do we make it work?
Yeah. And I think as we flick through, because I'm conscious, look, the little red
light's
gone red. It's gone red, which means we're running out of time. So we really wanted to leave you with the so what. So you've got some stats about connection or disconnection in the workplace. We shared with you some of the information about what we did at RG, but also about some of the stuff that different generations are looking at and the things you've got to get on board with the different generations coming into the workforce in the future. What are some of the practical things you can actually take away and do? Well, most of us should think like marketeers, right?
Yes. Market your people brand internally. And if you don't know where to start, make friends with the marketing team. That's what they do. Think about how much do your brands and businesses know about your customers. They know where they shop. They know their age. They know how they like to buy. They know what they like to buy. And we know the amount of investment that goes into knowing our customers, no matter which brand we're in. Do we have that same level of investment, focus, and attention on knowing our people? And that's a big question to take away. We can't answer it now, but I would say just really think, make friends with your marketing and BI teams. How can you help them really level up so you become data rich and evidence-based?
Yeah, I think that's really important. One of the key parts of evidence-based HR is not just the numerical data, but think about employee voice. Ask your people, what do they want? One of the things that I'm starting to see more of and championing myself is best practice HR, chuck it in the bin. Best practice HR for the last 70 years has got us still talking about best practice HR today, and we've not made a blind bit of difference. Start thinking about personalization and hyper-personalization within your businesses. What works for you, for your culture, for your people? That's the stuff that's going to make the difference in your organizations to your people, whether they are engaged, whether they stay longer, whether they come and work for you in the first place. You cannot do generalization anymore. One size absolutely does not fit all. So, leaving you with these 5 actions to have a think about. Even if some of them are just dabbling, or you're just curious, or you want to come and speak to us afterwards, we can tell you a bit about what we do at RG in this space. Employee experience mapping. Using a typical life cycle, plot out the things that matter to people the most. So what are the things that people stay up at night worrying about? What are the things that get people out of bed because they're excited about it? And start at the start. What are the things that drew people to your brand in the first place? Because you've got to make sure that you play it forward from that point. But you've got to make sure that's true. They've joined you for a reason, so let's make sure the experience they get when they join you is what they signed up for in the first place. The moments that matter kind of feeds into that. The employee personas, give this a go. This is a bit of fun. You can be as creative as you like, creating fictional characters. What I absolutely encourage you to not fall into the trap of doing is just using demographic data. Think about motivators, needs, think about frustrations, career development opportunities. These are the things which just takes it up a level. And what employee personas allows you to do is stress test anything that you're launching, anything that you've got in your business. Before you do it, what impact is it going to have on these personas? So you can have that information in advance before you launch something and then wonder why on earth no one's taking advantage of it or using it. Engage and listen to your people. It never stops. Whether it's surveys, focus groups, listening groups, pulses, whatever way you want to do it, exit data, stay data, Glassdoor, whatever way you do it, your employee voice is equally valuable when it comes to your data as your numbers data. So ask your people what they want and test it with them quickly. And then obviously one of the questions we always get asked is, well, we don't have any budget for that. And we've got to sell this to our business leaders, and they're telling us we've got to create a business case for generating money or saving money and that sort of stuff. The way we suggest our clients do this now and think about this is, what is the cost if you don't do it? If you frame the conversation in that way, it's a much easier conversation to have than trying to get the benefits of you if you did do it. If you did nothing in this space, if you didn't adapt your benefits, your EVP, your communication for the different generations, the different complexities of life at the moment, what is the risk of not doing anything? And I assure you, for your CEOs or your CPOs or whoever else you've got to get your money from, that will be much more than investing a small amount of time and money in doing something in this space in the first place. I think the light is actually flashing, so we're definitely out of time now. As I mentioned, we're just on stand out here. If you want to come and chat to us afterwards, we'll be out there. You can come and grab your own copy of the Workplace Connection Report. Thank you very much for listening.